I'm so honored to be here today. And the work in progress I want to talk to you about starts with the combination of a garden and a collection. And the garden is an ornamental flower garden I work on at my mother's house in Providence. And it's a place where I can experiment with abstraction and lines, where I can draw with plants and see what happens, experiencing the culmination of my plans. But then, when it becomes chaos and goes beyond what I had intended, appreciating the beauty of that as well. The collection is a collection of printed pottery, most of it from England and most of it from the first half of the 19th century. And it is very relevant to the topic of this conference because this was an industrial product that brought functional objects to the masses, but it also satisfied their deep need for decoration and images. So printmaking and ceramics came together. And it also exemplifies the art and design version of the hybrid, which is something that we call eclecticism. It's gathering source materials from many periods and cultures and bringing them together to make objects that speak to the present. But I love this stuff because it's printed. And it's not just printed, it's printed with engraving. And that's what I do. I'm an engraver. And so I use this tool to cut lines on a copper plate, fill them with ink to make prints. And engraving offers this kind of unprecedented clarity of line and this great control within the constraints of the medium. And so my question to myself was, what would happen if I, as an artist, would take my skills in engraving, which are very different from what the 19th century artists did, and use them in a project of my own? Now, my process usually works by moving between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions and back and forth. So starting with a flat sheet of paper, I cut, folded, scored, and glued to make these plate shapes. Some of the plates refer to the Victorian forms. Others just occur naturally with the divisions. Now, moving from those pieces of paper to this exquisite glazed white earthenware was not easy. But I'm fortunate to work at Rhode Island School of Design, so I just have to walk across the street to get some world-class expertise. And I turned to my colleague, Larry Bush, professor of ceramics, and he formulated the clay and made it. I mean, there's certainly nothing more elemental than what Larry's doing right here. He came up with the production method and introduced me to some of the most talented young people I've ever met, including Jack Yu here, who helped me make this work happen. And here are the 12 plates. We made them 150 of each of them as for the edition. Moving back to the 3D is when I started to do my design process and really started to think about what it's like to be in the outside world, to watch the lettuce grow and draw it, to sit in the dog days of August and get a feeling for that atmosphere and find the settings for my scenes. So I've devised 12 scenes showing me going through the months of the year. And the title of my project is The Autobiography of a Garden, something of a tribute to Gertrude Stein. It's a narrative, but it's also a cycle. And that means that these scenes happen many times during the months when they may occur, but also that they happen year after year. The subject is really about labor that makes beauty. And I think this subject very much runs parallel to the labor that goes into making this work. I go back to the 3D after working on my drawing table and those things and do these paintings outdoors again to study the plants, the atmosphere, the architecture. And then I build these models of the figures and incorporate that into the final painting, which is the thing that I'm looking at when I make the engraving. So this is the first engraving that I finished. And when I saw it on a piece of paper, I thought it looked nice, pretty good. But when I put it on the pottery and pulled it out of the kiln, I realized that something was wrong, that there was a kind of constrained relationship between the image and the object, that the lines were too dense. It really wasn't coming together. And I knew I had to go back to my engraving table and start over again. And what this is really about is a question of style. And in my world, we don't talk about style very much. There's this sort of false dichotomy between style and substance. But I think style is a very important thing. It really builds the content, and it really inflects the meaning of a work of art in an important way. If you look in the background to the left in this scene, you'll see two prints from my collection. One is an engraving by Jean-Émile Laboureur from 1932. And the way he did the oak leaves has been the talisman for me through this process. I love the way that he created the air in the leaves with those simple lines. The other print is from 1573. It's by Cornelis Cort. He's considered the engraver who really originated the landscape engraving. And his trees are very compelling, but I'm also highly drawn to his use of the outline and shading in the figure. So you can see in my mustard greens here, I incorporated some ideas from Laboureur. And in the figure, I used some ideas from Cornelis Cort. And that is eclecticism, that is the fine arts hybrid. When this print was on a piece of pottery, I realized that something new had happened, that there was a much stronger relationship between the image and the form, that the way this print was done allowed the glow of the ground to come through, and I realized I was looking at an entirely new medium for me. And it's a medium in which each line has to be responsible to the decorative requirements of the piece, of the whole thing. I've noticed that when working on my copper plates, they have this kind of new sparkle to them that really refers almost to decorative metalwork. And as I work on the details, I think of each line and what it needs to do on a micro decoration level for the whole thing. Now, when this is, and this has also very much informed my designs for the back stamps. I didn't put decorations on my borders, but I'm using the back stamps to kind of propose what those ornaments might be. When the print is on a piece of paper, to me, it doesn't look finished. The sidewalk hasn't been filled out. That little area to the upper right doesn't have any shading. But when it's printed on the plate, it's complete. Something about it being framed by that format and having that sort of glow of the ground come through really softens the atmosphere and makes it pop into a full space. Now, I brought along one of my own plates to show you, and I think it's important at this point to really sort of bring it back to the actual object. So I think they're bringing it out. So my question to end with really is, what is this thing? It's a print. It's a plate. You can hang it on the wall. But unlike a work of paper, it could last for thousands of years. It's the embodiment of all of the influences and sources that went into it. It contains the hundreds of touches of the fingers by myself and many people that went into making it. The subject shows a neighborhood that took its present form maybe in 1920. The middle-aged gentleman who's working on the garden with such ardor is a plausible figure perhaps from the 1940s, even though his sandals give it away that this is today. But what is it ultimately? It is ultimately a piece of contemporary art. And that's my final question, I think, for the conference, is the question of what is contemporary? We have so many things out there that try to tell us what contemporary is in advertising and media. But my position is that contemporary is the amalgam of all of the sources that we use to create these eclectic objects and these visual hybrids. And I think it's these contemporary, this sort of particular eclecticism of our time that's going to carry the visual culture of our world into the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.